In the spring of 1999, the Hollywood Chamber of Commerce contacted Clint Eastwood's office with an offer that virtually no one in the entertainment industry had ever refused. A star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, Clint's response arrived 3 days later. He was honored, his office said, genuinely honored. But he had a request, not for himself, for someone else. What followed was a conversation that nobody in the chamber had been prepared for, and a decision that would quietly become one of the most talked about moments in the history of an institution that had been handing out stars since 1960. The Hollywood Walk of Fame stretches for nearly 2 miles along Hollywood Boulevard and Vine Street. By 1999, it contained over 2,000 stars, each one a brass medallion embedded in a pink terrazzo sidewalk square, each one representing a negotiation between the Chamber of Commerce, the recipient's management, and the complex machinery of Hollywood recognition. The stars were not simply given, they were applied for, campaigned for, lobbied for. They cost money. The recipient's team was expected to contribute to the cost of installation and the accompanying ceremony. They required a sponsor, a ceremony, a crowd, a publicist coordinating the coverage, a management team managing the optics. They were, in the language of the entertainment industry, a deliverable, a tangible product of a career that had reached a certain level of recognized importance. And like most deliverables in the entertainment industry, they tended to go to the people who had the teams and the resources and the momentum to pursue them, which meant that the stars on the Walk of Fame were a reasonably accurate map of Hollywood power, but a much less accurate map of Hollywood contribution. Clint Eastwood had reached that level approximately 30 years before 1999. The conversation about his star had been happening in various forms for the better part of a decade. His management had raised it periodically. The chamber had made informal approaches. The timing had never been quite right, or the moment had never felt important enough to Clint to prioritize, or the particular form the recognition would take had never quite aligned with how he thought about these things. Clint was not someone who pursued recognition. He was someone who pursued work. The distinction mattered to him in practice rather than in theory. Recognition was what happened to the work afterward. And what happened to the work afterward was less interesting to him than what happened to the work during. In 1999, the chamber made a formal approach. The letter, addressed to Clint personally, described the honor in terms that were genuine rather than merely ceremonial. His career, the letter said, had shaped American cinema in ways that would be felt for generations. His presence on the Walk of Fame was not just appropriate, it was overdue. The chamber would be honored to have him join the ceremony at whatever date worked for his schedule. Clint read the letter. He sat with it for 3 days, and then he called his assistant and dictated a response that was unlike anything the chamber had received in its 40-year history of making these offers. He was grateful, he said. He understood what the honor meant, and he did not take it lightly. But he had been thinking about someone else, someone whose name was not on the Walk of Fame, whose career had shaped American cinema as profoundly as anyone of his generation, and who had never received this recognition, not because the career wasn't there, but because the campaigns hadn't happened, the lobbying hadn't been done, the machinery hadn't turned in his favor at the right moments. That person was Don Siegel. Don Siegel had directed 5 of Clint's most important films: Coogan's Bluff, Two Mules for Sister Sarah, The Beguiled, Dirty Harry, and Escape from Alcatraz. He had been the director who, more than anyone else, had shaped Clint's understanding of what film could be, not just as a commercial product, but as a precise, disciplined, morally serious art form. Siegel had taught Clint to move fast without losing depth, to trust the camera rather than explaining everything through dialogue, to understand that restraint was not a limitation but a choice, and that the right choice made at the right moment was worth more than 10 wrong ones made with enthusiasm. Clint had said all of this publicly in various interviews over the years. He had never hidden his debt to Siegel. He had spoken about it with the particular directness that characterized everything he said, not sentimentally, not with the performed gratitude of someone building a public image, but as a simple statement of fact. Don Siegel had made him a better filmmaker. That was true, and Clint saw no reason not to say so. The entertainment industry was full of people who had been shaped by others and either didn't know it or didn't say it. Clint was neither. He knew exactly where the things he did well had come from, and he gave credit without being asked and without expecting anything in return for giving it. What people didn't know was that Clint had been privately troubled for years by Siegel's absence from the Walk of Fame. Siegel had died in 1991 after a long career that included not just the Eastwood collaborations, but a body of work stretching back to the 1940s, films like Invasion of the Body Snatchers, Babyface Nelson, Riot in Cell Block 11, films that had influenced generations of directors who were now considered masters of American cinema. Siegel had received recognition from critics and fellow filmmakers, but the Walk of Fame had never happened. The campaign had never gained sufficient momentum, and now Siegel was gone, and the star that should have been his had never materialized. Clint's letter to the chamber did not demand, it did not threaten to refuse his own star if Siegel wasn't included. It simply asked, with the quiet clarity of someone making a case they believe in, could the chamber consider giving the star to Don Siegel? Or, if that wasn't possible, given that posthumous stars required a different process, could the chamber move forward with a simultaneous recognition Clint's star and Siegel's star side by side at the same ceremony? The chamber's initial response was gentle confusion. The request was unprecedented. Stars were given to people who were being recognized. The process of requesting that someone else receive the honor alongside you was not something that had a protocol. The board would need to discuss it. The board discussed it. The discussion, as it turned out, was not complicated. The members of the board understood exactly what Clint was doing and why. Don Siegel's career justified a star on its own merits. The question had never been whether he deserved one, but whether the institutional momentum would ever exist to make it happen. Clint Eastwood was providing that momentum simply, without drama, by saying, if you want to recognize me, recognize him too. The chamber said yes. It took them 2 weeks to reach the decision, during which time Clint's office received no fewer than 4 phone calls from chamber representatives asking clarifying questions about the nature of the request, the precedent it would set, and whether Clint had considered the possibility of the sequential option rather than the simultaneous one. Clint's answer to all of these questions was the same. He understood the complexity, he appreciated the consideration, and he was asking for the simultaneous ceremony, together or not at all, though he didn't quite put it that way. He simply kept saying what he wanted, patiently, without elaboration, until the answer came back, yes. On a Thursday morning in May 1999, Clint Eastwood and Don Siegel, or rather Clint Eastwood in the memory of Don Siegel, represented by his family, received stars on the Hollywood Walk of Fame in a joint ceremony that had never been done quite this way before. Clint's star was placed first. Siegel's star was placed directly beside it. At the ceremony, Clint spoke briefly. He had been asked to give a speech about his career and what the honor meant. He gave a different speech instead. He talked about Don Siegel, about the first day he had walked onto a Siegel set and understood immediately that he was in the presence of someone who knew exactly what he was doing and why. About the specific things Siegel had taught him, not through formal instruction, not through speeches about filmmaking philosophy, but through the daily example of a man who approached every shot, every scene, every creative decision with the same focused precision that a craftsman brings to the thing he has spent a lifetime learning to do. He talked about the debt that younger artists owe to older ones and about how rarely that debt gets acknowledged in the way it deserves. He talked about how the entertainment industry was very good at celebrating its contemporary stars and very bad at honoring the people who had made those stars possible. He said that he hoped the star being placed beside his today would go some small way toward correcting an oversight that had troubled him for years. Then he stopped. He didn't wrap it up with a grand statement about legacy or cinema or the importance of the Hollywood Walk of Fame. He just stopped the way he always stopped when he had said what needed to be said, and saying more would have been saying less. The ceremony was not a major media event. The two stars were laid in the sidewalk, the families gathered, the photographs were taken. But the story moved through the industry with a particular velocity that genuine gestures of character tend to generate in a world that sees too few of them. Directors talked about it, producers talked about it, younger filmmakers talked about it, the ones who had grown up watching both Clint's films and Siegel's films and understood immediately what was being said and what it cost to say it, not in money, in the particular currency of public recognition, which is finite and which most people, when given the opportunity to accumulate it, tend to accumulate rather than redirect. There is a version of this story in which Clint accepts his star gracefully, mentions Siegel in his speech, and everyone nods approvingly and moves on. That version requires nothing. It costs nothing. It changes nothing. Clint didn't tell that version. He told the version that required the chamber to do something it had never done, that required his team to navigate an unprecedented request, that required him to make his own recognition contingent on someone else's. That version costs something, and because it costs something, it means something. What nobody reported at the time, and what only came out years later through the accounts of people who had been close to the situation, was that the chamber had initially offered Clint the option of keeping his star as originally planned and having Siegel receive a separate star at a later date, a sequential recognition rather than a simultaneous one. Clint had declined this option. His reasoning, as he explained it to his team, was simple. A separate ceremony at a later date, without him there, without the specific gravity of this moment, would have been easy for the chamber to defer and eventually not do. The momentum would dissipate, the commitment would soften, the star might arrive someday, or it might not. Together was the only version that guaranteed both. It was characteristically not a grand statement and not a dramatic gesture. It was just clear thinking about how things actually work, specifically about how institutional momentum dissipates when the person generating it is no longer present to sustain it, applied to a situation where most people would have accepted the easier option, congratulated themselves on their generosity, and told themselves they had done enough. Clint did not accept the easier option. He accepted the only option that actually guaranteed the outcome he wanted. In 2007, a documentary about Don Siegel's career was released. Clint was among the commentators. When asked about the Walk of Fame ceremony 8 years earlier, he said something that had not been in any of the contemporary coverage. Don taught me everything I know about how to move through a story without wasting time, he said. The least I could do was make sure he got there. He paused. Besides, he added, in the tone of a man making a point that should be obvious, who wants a star on a sidewalk by themselves? Here is what the letter to the Chamber of Commerce teaches us, if we pay attention to the right part of it, which is not the part about Clint Eastwood being generous, though he was, and not the part about Don Siegel being overlooked, though he was, but the part about what it looks like when someone uses the weight of their own recognition to lift someone else's. The temptation when we are offered recognition is to accept it. This is not a small temptation. Recognition is rare and it is meaningful, and it is the kind of thing that most people who have worked hard for a long time genuinely want and genuinely deserve. There is nothing wrong with wanting it. But there are moments when the recognition we are offered gives us the opportunity to do something more valuable than receive it, to use the weight of it, the momentum of it, the institutional attention that has been directed toward us to make something happen that would not otherwise happen. To say yes, and also this. To turn the spotlight, even briefly, toward someone who has been standing just outside it. These moments are rarer than they should be. Most people, when the spotlight finds them, use it to illuminate themselves more fully. The instinct is understandable. The spotlight is warm. The recognition is earned. Why share it? Clint Eastwood didn't refuse his star. He accepted it. He just made one condition, quiet, direct, non-negotiable, that the person who had helped him earn it be standing beside him when it was placed. Or rather, since Don Siegel was no longer alive to stand beside anyone, that the recognition of what Siegel had contributed be placed in the sidewalk next to the recognition of what Clint had built from it, so that anyone walking down Hollywood Boulevard could see, without needing an explanation, that these two things belonged together. That is the whole story. Simple, direct, characteristic of everything he has ever done. The two stars are still there, side by side, on Hollywood Boulevard. One says Clint Eastwood, one says Don Siegel. They have been there for 25 years. If this story moved you, subscribe, hit the like button, and share it with someone who has ever had the chance to redirect recognition toward someone who deserved it, someone who took that chance, or someone who needed to hear that taking it was possible. Some stars shine brighter when they're not alone. Clint Eastwood understood that. He always had, think about the people who made you who you are. The teachers, the mentors, the colleagues, the collaborators who gave you something you carried forward and built on. Think about whether they know that, whether you have said it clearly in public in a way that cost you something, whether the people who come after you will know that those people existed and what they gave. Clint Eastwood knew. And he made sure the sidewalk knew too.